Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special edition of Inside the NFL Front Office. I'm Tom Moore from VikingFans.com, and joining me for the fourth consecutive year to talk about the 2017 draft is the man who should know best. He's general manager of the Minnesota Vikings, Rick Spielman. Rick, welcome back.
Thank you for having me on again this year.
Not a problem. Hey, I got to tell you, the last time I saw you, it was in the Players' Tunnel in Jacksonville for the game against the Jaguars. And at that time, your offensive line, it was so injury depleted that you were pretty much holding them together with duct tape. Yet the call for me to play center never came from you. And Rick, I was wondering, I was wearing deodorant that day. I'd eaten my protein bar, and we both know I look good in front of a camera for an interview. I'm curious, why didn't you give me the shot over Nick Easton that day?
Well, it was a tough call, but it came down to just he practiced that week and you didn't. Otherwise, it could have been it was definitely an option that we were looking at, but just felt we had to go with what we had.
Well, Rick, it seems like that no job holder in America other than the President of the United States has his actions questioned as much as the GM of an NFL football team. And in fact, every fan thinks they can do a better job picking than the GM can. And I'm curious, do you ever read what fans say? And if so, what would you say to help them understand how an apparent college star like a Gino Torretta or Andre Ware doesn't always make a great NFL player or fit a team system?
Well, it's there's a lot of things involved in it, and I know ever since fantasy football had come about that they don't want to be head coaches anymore. They want to be GMs now, which is great because that's what drives the traffic. It's another aspect that makes the NFL so intriguing. It's probably why the NFL draft is so popular. But you have to understand there are a lot of things that we know from the inside and a lot of information that we have that will never come public. And that's from all the research we do, from what our psychologists are telling us to what our private investigators are telling us. And a lot of times things that are actually reported out in the media, and I read the Twitters and things like that, and it's amazing, and I just shake my head how much is not true that's being reported. So, and I know some of the stuff because everything wants to be instant news right now, or they want to speculate on this and speculate on that. And, even as we went through free agency, I'm seeing names that Vikings have an interest in this player or that player, and I'm just like, we never even talked to that person's agent. So, I know that's the biggest challenge is if you read everything and try to go out there and say this is not true or this is not true, you spend all your day doing that instead of doing what you're hired to do is doing everything from film study and trying to make the best decisions you can. But the biggest factor is people on the outside don't know all the information that we have on the inside, and that's what we not only determine on where we draft a guy or if we're bringing a signing a guy as a free agent, but we know all the medical, all the other things that will never become public.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, after several years of picking multiple players in the first round, you kept the Viking faithful glued to their television sets pretty late at night on that first night on Thursday, wondering if you were going to make a deal to move up into the first round again. And while you ultimately waited until the second round to make your first selection this year, were there ever any serious talks about you moving up into round one this year?
No, I felt that, and I kind of indicated that in my pre-draft press conference, was that this draft was very deep through the middle rounds, that you didn't need. There was not one specific player that you would have to go up and get that we couldn't maybe get the same value in the middle rounds. And to have those picks, the extra third and the extra fourth this year were very valuable to us. And so because of the depth and how our board looked and the depth of this draft class, it was better to sit and wait and see what kind of came your way.
Yeah, well, when that second round actually came, many conjectured again as they all try to guess what's going to happen. The Vikings might take a running back, but they all were pointing to Joe Mixon out of Oklahoma. And there's really two questions here for you, Rick. What made you decide to move up in the round to get your guy? And what did you see in your first pick, Dalvin Cook, that made you realize he was the best fit for this Viking offense?
Well, all you had to do was watch the Michigan game, and that would tell you what kind of player he has. But, we had very high grades on him. He was sitting there and sticking out like a sore thumb after Thursday night. And made the decision that once he started coming down a little bit in the second round, that it was definitely worth going up there and trying to grab him. So we were very aggressive on Friday night, making a lot of phone calls, and finally were able to make a trade to get up there. And he was just too talented of a football player not to try to go get.
Absolutely. And a lot of people say Cook reminds them of Warwick Dunn. For the fans, so they know better when you looked at him, is there any former or current running back that reminds you of Cook, or does Cook have a unique skill set all of his own?
We look at that and we talk about that a little bit in the draft meetings. But it became a lot more serious all day Friday when he was still sitting there because I did not think he was going to get out of the first round because I thought that's how talented, and we felt that he was too talented to get out of Thursday night. But when that did happen, the thing that he has is he has tremendous balance as a runner, great vision. He can put his foot in the ground, and he has explosive playmaking ability. But the other added flavor to it is he is a weapon in the passing game as well, and he can take a screen, he can take a check down route, and he can turn it into an explosive play as well. So we felt, one of the areas that we definitely had to address was improving our offense, and we felt we did that in free agency, and then to add some playmakers and to add a playmaker like Cook is going to be a huge plus for us.
I always run the risk when I ask who's the guy reminds you of, because I was afraid you might say Red Grange, and if you did that, we got our entire base going to the internet search and trying to break it to see who the galloping ghost.
I was going to say Tom Moore, but I don't know if anyone can relate to that.
Well, sure. Back in the '60s, a little bit of a Packer there. Well. Here's the question I say. So now you fit him in a backfield that suddenly is a bit crowded. Not a bad situation to be. You've got Cook. Obviously, you picked up Latavius Murray, and you've got Jerick McKinnon, who was last year's leading rusher. How do they all fit in? And does McKinnon now become a de facto third down back?
No, I think those questions will all work themselves out. I think at this point of the year, you're just trying to get the best players you can in here. And once we get all our players in, I think this was the last chance to add some significant players to your roster in this draft, and we don't even look at it that way. We look at let's get the best players in here, and then the coaches will figure it out on how that rotation is going to work because they all have value, they all have playmaking ability, and we're excited to have three backs of that caliber.
It sure does make training camp something to look forward to for fans. And one last question on Dalvin Cook before we go. I mean, he obviously, a lot of people thought he was the best runner in the draft, but he slid down on some teams' boards and completely off of it because of a string of alleged off-field incidents. And I'm curious, what makes you feel like those issues are behind him, and how does a team like the Vikings help advise and counsel young players coming in on how to behave off the field as semi-celebrities and what they maybe should watch out for, and what, for many of them, is their first real job?
Well, I think the thing that's starting to trickle down now to the colleges is one, how the NFL is handling off-field incidents while they're in college, and as you've seen, a couple players that were more than talented enough to be invited to the combine weren't invited to the combine. The other thing is that it's really starting to resonate with these players that it is going to affect you, and it can affect you financially if you don't know how to act or do the right things off the field. But I know the due diligence we do and how hard we work at it to try to make sure we are very comfortable with whoever we bring into the organization, and that the locker room we currently have right now, the support staff we have in place, that if we go ahead and draft a player, I know from an organizational standpoint, from the ownership on down, we feel confident that this player will not only be a great player for us, but also the type of Minnesota Viking player we want on our roster.
Sounds good. Now, in order for him to be successful, you need a strong offensive line. You've taken a lot of steps towards that in the offseason by adding the two free agent tackles in Riley Reef and Mike Remmers. And on Friday, you moved on Ohio State center Pat Elflein in round 3. And then in the 5th round, you selected a guy many draft prognosticators thought was going to go higher, and that's Miami guard Danny Isadora. And I'm curious, these are two athletic linemen who can pull and they can trap when they need to. What can fans expect from these two, and what positions do you envision each playing in the NFL?
I think once they get in here, the coaches will definitely start putting all the pieces together. I know as we head into training camp and through these OTAs coming up here at the end of May and through June, that the coaches will start putting all the pieces together. What are our best five offensive linemen and where they're going to line up? But a lot of those guys that we have taken, from even the unrestricted free agents, they can play multiple positions up front. And I know last year we just got killed with all the injuries, and we were down to, I think we started our fifth left tackle in the last game of the regular season, who we picked up off of Jacksonville's practice squad a couple weeks before. It's just we got so wiped out that we felt if we can get these guys that fit our profile, that are tough guys that we want to get definitely the running game. We have to do much better in the running game. And I think we did that with the offensive linemen that we brought in and the type of backs that we have on our roster. And these guys can play multiple positions too. So just so in case, I don't think, knock on wood, that we have to go through what we went through last year, especially up front, because that's the hardest position to fill. There's none left on the street. And it's hard enough to find these guys and develop these guys, because that seems to be the position which takes the longest to develop. And some guys don't hit it till their fourth or fifth year. So we just wanted to get the best guys that fit the trait, being athletic, but they are physical, aggressive football players that like their job when they have to play in the trenches.
Absolutely. I'm assuming with both guys that while it may take time to develop for most, you are hopeful they can come in and compete right away.
No, we're expecting them to come in and compete right away, and very excited about what Elfline can bring to our front this year, and there'll be a lot of high expectations of him being inserted as quickly as he's ready to go.
Right, as you shift over to the defensive side of the ball, one of the fourth-round picks you had was Michigan linebacker Ben Gedeon. And with longtime Viking and fan favorite Chad Greenray, he retired this offseason. Does Gedeon have the tools to start right away, or do you expect more of a spirited competition in camp with him, Emmanuel Lemur, Edmund Robinson, maybe Kentrell Brothers?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a very, very good competition as we head into training camp. And just, Gideon is just another one of those, just when you watch him on tape, he's just a very good football player. He led tackles and led the production down at Michigan. He was very good when he played in the Senior Bowl. And he just has a knack for making plays. And it told a lot of people, reminded me of those throwback types of like the Scott Studwells of the world, just because of how he plays the game, how smart he is, relies on his instincts. And even though, he may not run a 4.5 in a 40, but there's no one that beats him to the sideline because of the instincts and his ability to get a jump on where the ball is going. So very excited to throw him in the mix. And then the kid, Elijah Lee, who we drafted in the 7th round, also we have a lot of high expectations for.
I wanted to ask you a question so people understand the draft better. The fans love it when you stockpile picks in later rounds and you use them as currency to move up in rounds. But a lot of those fans wonder, what's the benefit of having so many 7th-round picks as opposed to maybe a few 5th-rounders?
Well, we ended up Friday using all our picks to move up to get two guys that we really coveted. And I think at that time we only had 3 picks left. And then when we got, that 2nd, 3rd round pick, if there's someone and using analytics, you can get the same value of a player at the bottom of the 3rd where we were picking, and the same thing at the top of the 4th. There's not a lot of difference over the history on how those players perform. So that's why we made the move to move down. We started to accumulate some more picks. And then I knew the depth of this draft class, and I knew, we were very fortunate that when we got into the 7th round and we had those 4 picks in the 7th on how we manipulated the draft board, that there were going to be players that were still very high on our draft board and very draftable players. And if you can get 3 or 4 of those 7s, and to me, the more chances you take on those late round guys, and you can hit on a Stephon Diggs or some of these late round guys that we have hit on, that it's better. You got a better chance if you have four to pick from than just one.
So the last question I had for you on the draft piece was, you talk about the two things all the time that are most important to you when you draft players. One is players who love the game and play with passion, and you want players that are coachable. How do you gauge those two things when you go through the scouting process?
We spent a lot of time, interviewing not only the players but a lot of sources we have around to really see if they check those two boxes. And I think the NFL had a new rule this year where in the past, if you FaceTimed a player, that had to count towards one of your top 30 visits. This year, it didn't. All you had to do was report that you had a FaceTime with that player, but it didn't count towards the top 30 visits because you can only bring in 30 players to your facility. So our coaching staff did an outstanding job, and we were very aggressive about interviewing not only at the combine and interviewing, when they came in on the top 30, but the guys that didn't come in on the top 30, that we spent a lot of time FaceTiming a lot of these players. So the coaches had even a better feel for these players because of the amount of time they spent with them on FaceTime and communicating with them.
As we close out our discussion, Rick, I know each draft you expect the additions to make all the success in the world on the field and hopefully a Super Bowl title for the Vikings. So with 11 exciting new faces now in the squad from the draft, would you expect the Vikings to be 16-0 in the 2017 season, or is 15-1 more likely for you with the players in the lineup?
All I know is all 31 teams right now are 0-0, and everybody expects to go to the Super Bowl, and that's why you're in this business. And that's why I try to work as hard as we can. Our coaches, our scouts, the front office to put the best players on the field, and the expectations in our building are very high about this football team.
Well, we appreciate you jumping by and joining us to reconnect with the fans, spend a few minutes talking about the draft, about the Vikings that they had over the weekend.
Thank you for having me on.
No problem. And I want to remind our fans to check out all the recent Viking news on Vikings.com and VikeFans.com. And so until next time, for Rick Spielman, I'm Tom Moore. So long, everyone.